could actually end up having a number of things tick off around the world, which would certainly meet that definition of a
number of conflicts tick off around the world, and the South China Sea being the potential tinderbox.
That's a potential. That's the center of gravity. As certainly, if you look at the big threat, the one that impacts markets, where the U.S. probably has the biggest financial interest overall, that is basically the South China Sea and what's happening in the West Pacific. It's not that we're not concerned about these other parts of the world. We are, and we are very much engaged there. But certainly from an economic standpoint, if you look at the impact that's going to have on the U.S. markets, a major war across the Middle East is big, but a major war in the West Pacific has a probably bigger potential. Most of the maritime commerce of the world travels through the South China Sea. 44% of maritime container traffic travels through that small Taiwan Straits, to give you an idea. So it's an absolute critical artery, if you will, for global trade. And if the South China Sea is blocked, then you have this very circuitous thing where they have to go around. Shipping would have to go around Australia, adding phenomenal amounts of ton miles. And by the way, I should mention with the Red Sea and the Houthi rebels, that has had a disruptive effect. I mean, that's about 15% of maritime shipping goes through there. But with that has added 5% to global, what they call ton miles, which is, basically cargo and the number of miles it has to do. 5% is a very significant impact to the global market.
According to the UN back in 2016, around 21% of all global trade went through the South China Sea. You have more updated figures. And again, that was back in 2016. As you mentioned, now there are major disruptions to other shipping and trade routes, with the Red Sea disrupted by the Iranian-backed Houthis firing missiles rather indiscriminately. The Russia-Ukraine war obviously causing global supply chain issues. So help us understand exactly how crucial the South China Sea route is now to global shipping and trade.
Well, most of the shipping, and depending on how you look at it, you can look at it in terms of gross tons, you can look at a number of certainly container traffic, but also you have to look at tanker traffic, and I say that with gas and oil traffic across the board. When you look at it, it's a phenomenal impact. Literally most of the shipping goes through the South China Sea from an economic standpoint. Now, different categories have different levels that they look at, but if you certainly look at container shipping, that is a preponderance of stuff that's impacted by what's happening in the South China Sea. I'd also remind everybody the South China Sea also is right next to the Sea of Japan, and of course that is a much you have basically a larger total waterway that could be impacted by a potential conflict with China. It's not just that one section of the water. Japan is very much leaning into this, looking at what could happen, how disruptive that could be. And it's not just stuff that goes through the South China Sea. It's not just material that comes from China or from Taiwan that could be disrupted. It's also the total impact that it would have on places like Japan. And hence, Japan has literally broken out of decades, literally since World War II, of taking a more passive stance, if you will, from a defense standpoint, to a much more active and aggressive stance with that. Right now, they are signing a mutual, was essentially a mutual defense agreement with the Philippines, which is rather interesting when you look at the history of Japan and the Philippines, and certainly the history of World War II. They're having an agreement to support each other in defense matters, and that is all aimed at dealing with this overarching threat of China in the South China Sea. And that is what Japan recognizes. Now, I actually was stationed in a part of Japan, Okinawa, that is in the South China Sea. That's one of the reasons that we've always had a presence there for quite some time. And so I'm very familiar with this. I was literally in Asia when the Philippine Navy grounded the Sierra Madre, that ship I talked about at the Second Thomas Shoal. I think it was in 1989. So I'm very familiar with with some of the history there that goes back, the difference is what China has done to its Navy, which is vastly expanded, and what they're doing sort of almost as hybrid warfare stand with their Coast Guard in the South China Sea.
So a lot of very intentional movements and provocations that have a far-reaching history. How would a conflict there now, though, increase global supply chain issues? I mean, what would that mean for various economic regions, for various goods? I mean, surely this would create more inflation, worldwide and certainly here in the US. Help us understand why you think that this is potentially so crippling to the global economy and very detrimental to the US if conflicts there escalate even short of a full conflict, just even if there's continued skirmishes.
A lot of times when people think of China, they think of the made in China, the manufactured goods. And certainly that is significant. I mean, there's a lot of goods. If you go to any big box store, for example, and look at the number of things made in China, you would quickly realize that's a large part of the inventory that they carry. So literally store shelves will start going empty, but it's also much bigger than that. If you look at semiconductors, which is huge in Taiwan semiconductors, which in certain categories controls up to 80% of the semiconductor industry or market, if you will, that would be shut down completely. Certainly any semiconductors coming from China would be shut down, but it would have phenomenal disruption of the supply chain around the world, because it's difficult to think of anything these days that has any electronic components, to include cars or anything else, that isn't reliant upon semiconductors. And so it would be massively disruptive, despite a lot of what's called nearshoring, trying to bring some of that semiconductor manufacturing capability to the U.S. It's still not caught up yet to make up for the potential deficit in that availability in that area. Also in rare earths, if you look at China, they actually do mine a lot of rare earths. They have a very substantial capability in that, but they really have a huge capability in processing. And this is after decades of subsidizing their rare earths industry. They knocked out rare earths production capacity in other countries simply because they were cheaper. And they made it that way. They took advantage of their WTO status, and they basically did some very predatory marketing, if you will, around the world to corner that market. Now we're all dependent upon them for certain rare earths that are absolutely vital for high-tech manufacturing. That would get shut down, and that's not something that can be turned on somewhere else quickly. That takes years and years and years to build that capability up. We recognize that. Other countries have recognized that. They're trying to nearshore the mining. They're trying to nearshore the production, if you will, the refining of these various different rare earth materials. But with that, it's going to take a while to catch up. And lithium is also another area. With lithium batteries, it's not so much what China produces, it's what China controls. And China is not just operating in China. They have huge interests. CATL, for example, has huge interests with the lithium supply chain all around the world, going into the Pacific region across the board, but also actually some of the stuff they're doing much closer to home in South America. They have a huge thing. In fact, we just saw that there was a coup attempt in Bolivia. So they have this critical position with a lot of this. And by the way, when they take that lithium out, they send it across the Pacific, and that's where they actually process that to create stuff that they can export everywhere. So it's a supply chain lock that they have. If the South China Sea, if the Sea of Japan is tied up with a major war, all of that supply chain will be massively disrupted. We'll have just overwhelming inflation. It's tough to even say what that would look like because of the second, third order effects, but there would be huge disruption to the global marketplace.